We are live with day 2 of the HETMA conference, virtual conference, and I guess there's no better way for, especially as this West Coasters at 8 a.m. in the morning than to start off with an AV as a service conversation, right? So we've got a good one to start off with. So I guess we should do some housekeeping, because yesterday I definitely didn't do any housekeeping when we first started, and that is in the chat. Obviously, Mike, you pointed out, and a few people pointed out, that if you want to chat, change your to all panelists and attendees rather than just all panelists, so everybody can get involved and be in the conversation. And it was a great conversation, so make sure that you do that. We're going to try to do as much of a Q&A as well at the end. We know this is going to be an interesting one. And I guess as we kind of go around, obviously I'm Joe Way, University of Southern California, Director of Learning Environments, and we'll go around and have everyone introduce themselves. And Scott, you know what we should do too? Hey-oh, hold on. Before we go any further, where's my record function? Pause. Oh. I think we're recording. Let me see.
I do see a little recording.
You do see the
indicator
recording?
Up on the top left of my screen, at least.
Excellent. All right. It tells me we're recording, so I want to make sure we're recording. Yeah, it looks like we are. Excellent. Cool. All right. Scott.
Hey,
How are
Joe.
you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Darn near perfect.
Are we going to introduce ourselves? Or
Yeah, we're going around. Oh, yeah. Let me get that coffee. We're introducing ourselves.
Okay. I'm Scott Tyner. I'm from Bates College up in Lewiston, Maine, where it's 11 o'clock now in the morning. So I've had a little more coffee in my brain than the rest of you to get started.
Yeah, indeed. And Mike.
I'm Mike Peterson. I'm the Audiovisual Experience Manager at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. And yeah, super excited to be here. I've only been in the position about a year and a half. Prior to that, I spent almost 19 years with an AV systems integrator. So
Nice. This is going to be really good having your point of view on this bit. And Donovan, introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Donovan Monday from West Virginia University, and I am a network engineer here at the Health Science Center.
All right. So I guess with AV as a service, and we need to talk about the history of kind of where we are and what this is. So Scott, do you want to take over, because you were the first one to kind of bring this up to our vertical and what this means?
Yeah, so I was looking back in that after we were talking about getting ready for this, and back in September of 2018, wrote a blog for rave pubs titled AV as a Service, It Just Does Not Make Sense, in which I tried my best to kind of just look at the numbers and say, here's what we spend on AV. What would it cost for a company to come in and provide me AV as a service for my college as a monthly payment? And kind of put that right all out there in the blog. Immediately I heard from some other people who were asking questions about it. We put together a panel for CCUMC that year on AV as a service. The panel started to look at some numbers, started to think of what is AV as a service. Presented, we had an integrator there on the panel who presented some of the things that he had done, I think with Loyola. I think that's who they had worked with. But really, those were kind of more service contracts than they were as AV as a service. And then that CCUMC is also where I met you, Joe. And a few months later, you on the scene with your T-shirt and AV as a service must die. And it's been
it's a special day to get me to dress up like this.
If this wasn't a virtual conference, you'd be shooting those out of a T-shirt cannon. And everything.
Don't give away my Infocom plan. No.
And so then it's just been a very popular topic amongst AV people, technology managers, in-house integrators, and the like. And so I think we'll just continue to talk about it here and see what makes sense. What do we think the future of it is? and where do we go?
Yep. And I think, and then from your conversation there, it ended up being that I was invited out to the PSNI kind of global alliance, their super summit in Atlanta, whenever that was, April, March of this last year. And there were 5 of us end users in various verticals. And the conversation about AV as a service came up, and I blurted out, well, AV as a service must die, hence the hashtag. And it turned out that that took on a life of its own. So if I'm going to have anything on a tombstone, it'll be that. But the interesting thing was, and to be honest, like right after that, I saw my Twitter blow up, and it was me being called a conceited jerk or condescending jerk. Why would I walk into an integrator summit and tell them that what they want to do in their service, their new service plan and way of selling should die? How dare I do that? I've had actual integrators tell me, flat out that I need to watch it if I want my career to continue in this industry. I mean, that serious of stuff, because it was a challenge against what wanted to be done. And I think that we've all said, we're just trying to figure it out, right? And that's kind of how the conversation continued. And I then ended up being, interviewed with commercial integrator, kind of said the same thing. They asked me great questions about, kind of why I felt as I did, and ended up having a lot of conversations with other integrators afterwards, because I made the challenge. I made a public call. Hey, quit bashing me and show me the money, right? Show me an actual contract. I will open everything up. I will give you a real, and if it really works, I will sign it, because my job is to make the right decisions for my institution. And if AV as a service is the right decision for my institution, I'll sign it, right? Why wouldn't I? And so that continued. And then Scott, you've recently now continued the conversation, came out with another article, and your view changed a little bit.
So I have, and to go back to one of the things you said, is I think it's actually very true. The integrators, we know there's some listening in here today. The really wise ones, and I know that there's a lot of them out there, are going to listen to what we talk about today and build contracts based on that, right? Based on what we actually need, and that will provide value to both of us. But yeah, I have started to change in two ways in my view on this. I think that there is a possibility that down the road there will be features that we need in classrooms that we don't want or can't afford all the time. And so I think of some overflow needs. I think of class capture and all the recording we could just do automatically in the cloud without any devices in a classroom, that we could turn those on and off as we needed to. I think of various potential accessibility pieces that we could add to classrooms kind of on the fly. I think the actual technology, the boxes, need to change a bit before we do that. But I think there's a piece out there where it would make sense to do this.
And so even in the middle of the conversation, Mike, you were on the podcast.
I was on the podcast.
And you were a side flipper as well.
I was. So I'll give you a little bit of background. Again, as I mentioned in my introduction, I spent about 19 years at an AV systems integrator. In the last couple of those years, I was trying to promote AV as a service within my organization. That, hey, we need to do this. We need to sell this. And from an integrator's perspective, it really does make sense. Any good business model that you can have, the good recurring monthly revenue, the RMR, that is, it's a very good thing for a business because it's consistent. You can predict it. One of the things that's difficult for AV integrators is that sometimes their business can get very lumpy. It's very hard to predict where you're going to be with your revenue coming in and with the work coming in. So anything that you can do that can kind of smooth that out and remove some unknowns from your business model, that's a great thing, and you should totally look at doing that. And so I was a huge proponent of it. And again, I really do think that in many cases, it's going to be a great model, and I think you're going to see a lot of success in it. But when I came and joined the higher ed side and came to Iowa State University and then began to study it and was looking at how that was going to work for us and what that might look like, it quickly became apparent to me, at least, that a full AV as a service model probably isn't going to work well in most higher ed institutions. Just the finances of it just aren't going to probably work in our favor. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that, and we're going to probably talk about all those today. So I don't know how far you want me to go into it now,
right.
or we can get into it later.
No, that's good. Let's jump into Donovan. So Donovan, you haven't been public about it much. So where is our differentiation here?
I think for me and for schools like us, it's not the fact that maybe AV as a service doesn't work, is that it's just not feasible. We don't have a integrator close. We don't have an integrator that is, or we haven't had an integrator that has shown the responsiveness that we need, especially to support a service model. So one of the things that we have done here at West Virginia is we have become self-sufficient. So we do and I think Scott said it best, where we're no longer an AV department, and we got to stop thinking of ourselves like this. We have to think of ourselves as in-house integrators. Mm-hmm. So we're no longer just, and again, and we've talked about this in a lot of other meetings and even at AVEXA, where we said, we're no longer just guys checking out projectors and putting up, TV carts and stuff like that. We're actually part of IT. We're doing, our own integrations and our own designs. So for me, AV as a service just doesn't exist in my world, I guess, more than it's not that it doesn't work.
Yeah. And so basically, as we're all reading the chat, and the thing is, right? And actually, there's great stuff in the chat, because also Matthew makes this point of, is there a difference between AV as a service higher ed and AV as a service corporate? And maybe there is, and I think we're going to get to that as we kind of go through this. But the thing is, now even taking that, and I remember you talking, Donovan, kind of about how, you're remote, how can you get those things, those SLAs, how can you get the service, and then this even continued now at CCUMC. So this is kind of now version part 3, because CCUMC this year, and we tried doing a part 2 panel, and wasn't it the most embarrassing thing you've ever seen in your life for the integrator who was there? I'm sorry, but I need to call it out. I'm not going to give your name on this, but everyone needs to go and look at this.
I hope it was. I hope it was embarrassing for them. I don't know that it came off that way, but I hope they were embarrassed walking away from it. We're not a small school. We're a 45,000 student organization, and for us to not have access to the same, we don't have access to integrators like you do at USC or at somebody, in Baltimore or DC or those kind of places have. So for us, it was more of a survival. We couldn't be down days and weeks at a time. We have to be up and running. So I think that was the biggest thing about being here, is that it's not that you can't, they don't want to sell us a service contract, or they don't want to provide services. It's just that, there was a thing yesterday, there was, what would a 5 to 10 minute response time look like in a contract? And I started laughing. I was like, how about a 5 to 10 day contract? That's what we look at, because that's even on good days. And I'm talking about, midsummer when it's nice, it takes, 2 to 3 days for somebody to get here, and then they have to turn around and order parts and then come back. And we just can't do that.
Yep. No, 100%. And that to me is kind of one of the biggest issues of it. Should we go to here? Let me reshare because Scott put together some wonderful stuff here that we're going to kind of jump into because, again, I think the point of this panel, that even already in the chat, the issues are coming up with SLAs of how can you, Michael puts, how can you get there fast enough? But so Scott, our point is, can it work in higher ed? So we're using basically your institution or similar to kind of get into this, right? I think this is important. You are our ITIL expert here. So first talk about let's define it.
Well, I think that this is one of the things that we talk about often amongst us is the value. And I know that both Joe and I, and I'm sure others, have talked about the fact that we want our integrators to make money. They need to make money, right? We need them. We need to be partners with them. They need to get value from us. We need to get value from them. And so if you look at this ITIL version 4 definition of service, it talks about value co-creation. It talks about outcomes that the customer wants to achieve. And it talks about managing specific costs and risks. And so I think a lot of times one of the things we hear from integrators who want to argue this point is they really tell us, well, we don't understand business. And so that's part of the problem. And when I look at service, one thing I want to point out is at Bates, at least, we've thought about this a lot. We've thought about value. So one of the things we do here at Bates that I don't think a lot of schools do, we do none of our own staging of events. We don't set up screens, projectors, microphones. We outsource all of that. Some ways you could call that as a service. Because we don't think that there's long-term value in having our techs do that. Our techs support our classroom and our faculty and our students full-time. That's all they do. So we do understand service. We do understand value and making decisions about what's providing value and what's not.
Yep. Oh, 100%. So, Donovan, you're laughing there. What's?
I'm reading the chat. Christopher was saying maybe I missed something. Are there schools who are not doing their own internal design, engineering, and integration? Is that really a thing?
It's a valid point.
I think the answer is yes, by the way, especially small schools. I think there are a lot of small schools that aren't doing their own in-house integration. They're probably doing their own support. But I do think that many smaller schools probably are not doing their own in-house integration.
Scott brings up a good point too, and we're talking about Andrew on the chat as well was talking about we don't have student workers here. I know that a lot of schools do, and we do all of our event setup. So we do the special events outside, we do graduations, we do the acoustic stuff during the farmers market, we do any of the special events in our our bigger areas. So having student workers would be great, except that they're not provided to us here. So if we were to farm that out, there's no one here to farm that out to.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. And I think, and it actually goes right into the next slide, because as you were talking, it made me think about that. So where is, who isn't doing anything? Where are we doing it? What level of it is there? So what is AV as a service? This is, can anyone actually say what it is? And I do like, Scott, what you put together here for a working definition.
And this is truly, I told you guys as we were prepping for this, this is Scott throwing words on a paper. This is what Scott thinks of as AV as a service. But even right before, 5 minutes before we started this, there was some discussion about what is AV as a service. So for me, when I think of as a service, we're in the IT world. I think about software as a service. I think about our music that we get as a service. So for me, it's not a service contract, and we're not talking about rented or leased equipment. It's a completely different concept. The best way that I've actually found to think about it is comparing it to many companies today that do printing as a service, which is they take care of everything. They send you paper, they send you toner, they send you the printer, and they say to you, I need you to change the paper, I need you to change the toner, I need you to give me a network connection and power. We take care of the rest. And so to me, that's kind of what AV as a service should be. I need network, I need power, and maybe I need you to be the tier 1 person And that's something I guess not a lot of us have thought about. Other than that, I take care of everything. And if things are broken, we take care of it. There's maintenance, we take care of it. We take on the servers. We just take care of everything. That's my view of it. I think even probably in this group, there's some slightly different views of that.
No, I totally get that too. But my problem is that, okay, so I've hired you to come in and build a classroom for me. And we're going to be the tier 1 support. We're the ones that are changing, if there's bulbs in a projector still, we change bulbs. If, somebody unplugs a HDMI cable, we go up and unplug that. But, the control system goes down, in our case, it's a DMPS. So it goes down. So I'm now calling my integrator saying, hey, we've got a problem. What do we do? When can somebody be here? Now it's, okay, well, I've got somebody maybe next Tuesday that can come down and take a look at that. Or I'll have somebody come down and they come down and go, yeah, it's bad. I got to order you a new one. Or it's a projector that has fried itself. And they're saying, well, okay, you have a service contract, but go ahead and call Panasonic and they'll send you an advanced replacement and then you can send it back. I'm doing all that work anyway. Mm-hmm. So where's my value added to that service contract?
That's the tough piece, right, Donovan? That even if we say we'll do AV as a service and we'll provide that tier 1 support that's comparable to changing a toner or changing paper, that tier 2 support is still too long. A day of a classroom being down is not acceptable. Barely 2 hours of a classroom being down is acceptable. And so that's where I think all of us have that struggle of getting to that next level and saying, boy, you can provide me a better service than what I'm doing already.
Yep. Well, and I think it's so interesting because when I had all these conversations with integrators after my call out, almost every one of them said, well, you already do service as a service every day because we're just like Uber and Zoom. Like, no, you're not. Okay. Let's talk about is Uber as a service 100%? But you know what the difference is? Once I don't need it anymore and they've dropped me off, they leave. Right? I mean, you're not going to finish class and go take the AV out every day. And then it comes back the second I need it. And then it's like, but it's just like Zoom. You already signed a Zoom. No, here's the difference. If I decide I don't want Zoom anymore, guess what? I just cancel that software contract and I say, okay, I now want to be a Teams or whatever, right? The equipment doesn't leave. What I'm running across it is what will change, right? That is not AV as a service, right? Or is not even what the industry is talking about, is not as a service. And maybe that's where I also have an issue. Maybe it's really just not an as a service, but they'd like the moniker. And because maybe we talk about this before we hit record, just because you change the name of it doesn't make it what it is, right? It's still the same old thing.
Well, I mean, in the chat, it's interesting. Dean Wentworth, one of the steering committee members, says all of that can be covered in an SLA. And Dean, that's completely true. The problem then is the money goes through the roof, because as somebody else wrote, you'd have to have somebody on campus. We would have to have somebody from that vendor on campus all the time. And then the money just doesn't make sense. We're not getting a better service and we're paying a whole lot more money.
Yep.
Many things going on there as far as the money goes. One of the things that we've talked about a lot too is that something that differentiates us from maybe a corporate client that might take this on is that we have student employees that we can pay, a relatively minimal wage compared to an integrator rate, and they can take on a lot of activity for us. So,
all right, which brings us to Scott. Here's your campus. Let's set the stage.
Yeah, so as I said, these are pretty close numbers to a typical small liberal arts college campus in the United States. Not saying it happens to be in Lewiston, Maine, but a rough estimate of salary and benefits, of your OPEX, of your CAPEX. CAPEX changes, we know, the number of spaces you currently have on campus, and the value of that installed equipment. And so the big question here, getting right to the money, is that's $420K per year. So if you said to me, I'm going to take care of everything with AV as a service, $420,000 a year. Okay, great, but I got to get rid of my staff now. So now you're that tier 1 person, which means somebody's camping out here on campus. We currently have a couple of people who are very busy all the time. So I think you probably have to put 2 people on my campus. Or we do the tier 1 ourselves, and now you provide this for about $260,000 a year. But again, what I'm telling you have to do is, in my opinion of an AV as a service, do whatever I ask you to do. And so if we decide that we're changing, I mean, over the past few years, who hasn't still been changing from digital, right? Boy, if this is an AV as a service, I might say, that's not taking 4 years to do. Next year, I expect everything to be digital. And I'm just going to keep making my expected monthly payments on that. Again, doing these numbers, thinking it as an integrator, and Mike, I mean, you've got to know, like, no integrator can do that.
Well, and one of the things I'm looking at your numbers too on that, and your CapEx budget. Well, you said 60,000, but you also said you had about 3 million in equipment. So let's give that a 5-year refresh cycle. Well, that's 600,000 a year, right? That that you'd be paying theoretically to recycle 3 million worth of equipment every 5 years. So the numbers just go through the roof, and it's really difficult. Again, you have to have boots on the ground as an integrator to meet the SLAs, assuming we're under the assumption that we're doing a full AV as a service where they're taking care of tier 1 and up. Just as the numbers would have never worked.
So let me ask you guys this, and maybe you guys have a better answer to this than I've had. And believe me, I am not anti-integrator at all. I came from the integrator world as well. I know that there are definite markets for it. But say we have an integrator that comes in and we do a project with them and they give us an SLA. How then do I hold them to that SLA, and what are the consequences for that? For us to have any kind of consequence for them not holding up their end of the bargain is months and months and months of work. So How does that work out in the end?
Well, I mean, that's actually huge, because I think about that. It's months and months of litigation, isn't it? Because they can just not show up, and you can say, fine, you're in default of contract, but so now what's the so what? What can you make them do about it?
When we're talking about, what John, forget who was from OU, Ben from OU was talking about, SLAs have driven him crazy. And then we're talking about, okay, so I have an SLA, and Jim, one of our steering committee members, says, okay, what if I get a 25% reduction in my budget next year? How do I account for that going forward? I mean, these are the big issues that we are dealing with. And then there's no consequences for us on the other side. We can't, if they decide not to show up tomorrow, it's another, 3, 4, 5 months before I can do anything about it.
So some of that, I think, and Donovan, you're in a unique place, I think, because of your location. I think I'm very similar, right? There's a very few number of integrators around us that we can deal with. Right. If you're going to look at some big players, you're talking about coming out of Boston, which is 3 hours away. But, big picture, let's talk about Joe. I've got a sense that Joe probably has some pretty big integrators next door.
There's probably a few right there.
Yeah.
A handful.
So to me, he writes into that contract, boom, every time you miss one of the goals on the SLA, we save $250 that month in our monthly payment. And it's just documented. When you show up on campus, you clock in. And if you didn't clock in that 2 hours you were supposed to, we're taking $250 less when we write you a check at the end of the month.
Yep.
So you got to do something like that punishes them. You and I are in a weird case because they're gonna be like, haha, okay.
Yeah.
It does it brings up that really interesting question about who owns what. Who do we own this? Do they own it? The printing, AV as a service printing model I told you about was, of course, printing's different because if a printer goes down for a day, people get upset, but they can live with it. If you kick that company out, they come and get all their printers and they're gone. And the next day you have a new printer come in. How do you do that with AV?
It doesn't work the same way.
100 classrooms worth of AV out and have a new one in the next day?
Well, I,
Especially when they want four business days per classroom just to put, change a projector. So
yeah, no, and I always look at it as that we've bought the gear, and then the service contract is separate, or the so it's our gear that, just like buying a car. I own the car. You guys are working on it on the warranty, but it just doesn't. And again, I'm not anti-integrator. I'm not anti, that this can't work for some people. I think for people who are in bigger markets like Joe and maybe people in Pittsburgh, which is, an hour and a half north of us, but it may work because they have people that are close by and there are multiple integrators that they can pull from. For people like you and me and some of the smaller schools that are in the world, that this just doesn't work as a day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about what people think about the ownership piece, because as I think of as a service, if it's music, if it's software, if it's printing, you own none of that, and you stop making that monthly payment. I don't own anything on Spotify, and if I stop making that monthly payment, I've got no more music to listen to. If I stop paying our ERP provider, we don't have an ERP anymore the next day. We just don't know it. So how does that work with this?
I kind of look at it the same way as you do a cell phone contract. Like, you buy the cell phone, you have AT&T as a service. I stop paying AT&T, I still own the phone.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
At the end of that contract, I still own it.
And again, those are all things that can be addressed in the SLAs, right? Those are all contract terms that you would have to get right the first time if you were going to really consider this. Who owns the gear? Somebody mentioned what happens if they go belly up. Again, that's all things that would have to go in the contract, right? I mean, if the company goes belly up, it would have to be written in the contract that we own the gear. The minute they go belly up, those are the types of things that you would have to get right in the contract. And then, again, some of that contractual things, yes, there are challenges. I think you could theoretically get the contracts written right to get some of that done, but I still doesn't think. But again, every time you make the contract more challenging or onerous for the integrator, guess what happens to the price? The price goes up. And so, then it just continues to become a challenge. As we discussed, how is this affordable? So.
Well, and not only that, okay, because like you said, Scott, since obviously none of us have any business sense, right? That's what they tell us. That let's pretend that we might. How is an integrator, outside of maybe the couple of large integrators in this country that are approaching the $1 billion mark, how many of them could really afford to come in here and take 250 of my spaces and put all that stuff in there, right? And so let's be honest, this is how they're doing it. They're getting their own financing, right? Yeah. I can say this too because integrators have already told me this, right? In my conversations. They're getting their own financing. They're leveraging it. They're getting letters of credit. And so here's the thing. They're leveraging and paying points. They need to make money. Who does that fall on to make, right? And so this is all, we're paying interest on interest so that they can make a profit. Okay. It doesn't work out financially. I am always better to end up taking my educational pricing and the amount of money, especially if they're looking at doing a large installation. What kind of pricing can we negotiate paying cash? Okay, I'm sorry, because we actually have that ability in higher ed, right? A lot of times if a new building comes up, it's because there's a donor's name going on it. We don't have, it's not like our schools go and earn paycheck. I mean, they do through tuition, but it's very, very different in the way we make these larger, upgrades. So, I mean, there's no way that this works out financially. And even what integrators have this ability to honestly leverage that much money. I mean, think about it. If every one of our institutions signed this, how much debt are the local integrators taking on to do this? And what happens when, I know there was talk just the other day about how many small schools are going under right now, right? There are a lot of institutions having a hard time. Well, what happens when the school goes under? these, and now you started, a chain reaction with all these contracts. That's kind of scary because, what are you going to really do when their tuition dollars, fall or enrollment drops and they still have this contract to do? I don't know.
Well, I love some of the other comments here that have come in. Dan Brower mentioned, integrators have multiple clients. What happens with the Fortune 500 company and my university both have an issue on the same day? Who gets the priority? And then somebody else mentioned, and who gets the A team? Does the Fortune 500 company get the A team, or does your university get the A team? And I'm guessing, again, hard to tell. As an integrator, you might be surprised who might get the priority, but I would bet in most cases the Fortune 500 company takes the priority in those cases.
Absolutely.
So I'm wondering, what about, one of the things I've kind of always wondered about, what about individual spaces? So I think about often in higher ed, the one space that I can really come up with would be an executive boardroom where the board of trustees and the president meet, or the executive board of the college would meet. Would that work as a service? Because we assume those are people who are executives coming from places where they expect new technology, always up to date. Maybe the as a service includes somebody there on staff while an event is going on. Maybe it includes checking it out the day before. And so I think maybe some of that might work. But then again, I think, boy, isn't our own staff doing that already? And so how is this an improvement on that? And so I wonder if has anybody done something like that? And the question of can the execs wait for support is no. So as a service, we actually have to be somebody on campus while the execs are meeting.
Yeah. Well, I guess
Maybe,
this is, oh, go ahead, Donovan.
Sorry, maybe I should start thinking about it this way. If I'm taking your words and saying we're in-house integrators, maybe we're providing AV as the service. We're the people that are providing that. So, thinking about it that way, if we start looking at ourselves truly as in-house integrators and as we're that taking on that business model, we're providing the AV as a service.
It's an interesting question, Scott. I mean, are there spaces where this may, I think we're all very focused on classrooms, right? And we're focused on, classrooms going down. It's not like you can move, it's not like typically you have a whole bunch of empty classrooms at any class period that you can move classes. Plus, what a hassle to have to move classes. It just practically doesn't happen. But what about other things? I love that. This is a great conversation. Again, I'm thinking like, what about athletics, right? Athletic fields. Can that become AV as a service? Because then, the integrator knows when the big games are. They would come out the day before, do a full check. They would have a full team on site for the game day. Could something like that work as a service?
Yeah.
Certainly that seems like that could be much more practical than the thing that we're all focused on, which is classrooms. So
yeah, well, and Chris, for just put in the thing, digital signage, and Scott, your latest article was something along those lines, right?
It was exactly about digital signage, and I do think that is a place. Again, we'd have to talk numbers and what it means, because again, as I work through the numbers, I struggle a little bit. But it's a place that I think even if we paid more money, we would get a better service. And so I think we might be willing to pay more money to get this better service, particularly with content. Content, I think, is always a struggle at schools for digital signage, in training and content and creating content. And so if you think of AV as a service with digital signage, you can also think of, well, boy, this department wants a new sign. Oh, great, X number of dollars a month. And the new sign's there and you're getting training on content, and that's how it goes. Oh, you're done with your sign, it's not worth it? Great, you take that bill off. And again, it's an investment for the integrator, but not that crazy enormous investment of multiple millions of dollars. They can make their money back on a TV in 1 year. And so, I mean, less than 1 year, right? Who knows? It makes more sense all around. And you can actually start to make some numbers work on digital signage. And I would actually expect to see that start to happen in places.
Yeah. Well, and also another location. And again, it's a possibility. I think it's where you have to have specific use cases. But like the Nexus Institute of Creative Arts in the UK actually does a production degree for worship leader or worship technicians, worship arts. Well, as part of their program, they want to teach from analog consoles, build up skills all the way up to the high end digital consoles. Well, the cost to own that, would be, and to take on, with the enrollment would just be way off the charts. So they partner with a rental company and they change out their consoles and everything as the program moves on, right? And it's set for whatever it is, a year or 2 years, or I don't know all the details. Is that maybe a place where something works because the actual technology needed changes? And I've heard that integrators talk about the same type of principle of, maybe you still put your cameras in the room or whatever, but you pay for what other features are checked off on the back end, right? So they come in and put the whole thing in there, but do you want it to do tracking and head counting, or do you just want it to face the front of the room? And they can do that from back end management.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I would think if you're putting a camera in that does all that stuff, why are you not just letting me have all the stuff it can do? So, all right.
I agree with Christopher too. Like we work the same way on our digital signage where, the AV department comes up with the design specs and does all the hardware, and then we hand off the content to marketing and communications. So that works the same way, but it's still all done here. You can call it whatever you want to, glorified PowerPoint or whatever else you want to call it, but it's still a digital signage model that works locally.
And in our case, and I think every case is a little bit different. And in that blog, I wrote about how I think every place is different, but our communications department is much more interested in external communication than they are in internal communication. So they want appropriate things on the signs, decent looks on the signs, but they're also not putting hours and hours and hours into helping to develop that content because their focus is really on external communication.
Yep. 100%.
So Dean asked a really interesting question. What if there is no AV department? I was curious how many schools out there don't run at least a minimal AV department, at least some kind of classroom services to take care of, urgent classroom needs.
Or is that rolled into your regular help desk?
Right.
Yeah, I wonder how many, and I think that's where. Chase just threw up a bunch of stuff, but I think that's where, if I look at where it works, right? So, and I've tried to find a model of where it works, and to me, I mean, this goes back to the question of AV as a service, corporate AV as a service, higher ed. I always think that if you have a business that's got an office in Boston, an office in LA, and an office in Miami, and they just need, one executive boardroom, 3 conference rooms, and a showroom with some, with a nice setup, and they don't want to have to deal with it, and they just want to be able to video conference among, and they want some flashy, video wall for the showroom. That works. But can you now scale it? And where can you do that same thing in a higher ed? I don't know, in a smaller section of it. I don't know. Special use case. I have no idea. Oh, chat is going off here.
Yeah,
so one of the other places maybe, and I know this is about higher ed, but maybe K-12. You could think perhaps K-12 probably don't have AV departments. They have very small IT departments. We're talking about a smart board in most classrooms. So maybe an AV as a service contract could work there. Maybe it's not as critical to get something up and running immediately. Then you run into the big question of, yeah, but what if that budget gets cut after year one? What happens?
Do you
but I
need
always,
a bond? You know, you have to get a bond to get it passed, you know, in
Yeah,
order to pay for it.
that's an interesting point, Scott. You know, you think, you know, that smart board goes down in a K-12 classroom. You know, maybe the school has one or two smart boards on a cart that they can use, just roll in to backfill. You know, doesn't work quite as well in a lecture hall. So,
Yep.
yeah.
All right. So here are some of the points based on our conversations that we had come up with that we were curious about. Like, okay, does the value increase or decrease as scale increases, right? Your thing, Scott, was based on 1,000 to 2,000 enrollments, say. Well, what happens if you add 0 to the end? You know, do they get better? And you said this during when we were originally talking, you had, you know, the mic drop moment of, you know, the service must be better or cheaper than we currently have. Like, why would I change for the same thing? Can you, at the amount, can you give me better service, or can you take the same level I have and drop the price for me? Right. So I think that's huge. I mean, what are the thoughts on that? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to, right? That's the whole part of value is either you're going to give me the same service I get today for less money, or you're going to give me better service and I'll pay more money for it. I'm actually very fortunate. I've said this to you guys. I'll say it again to everybody listening. I truly believe I have the best AV team in the entire country. And so you're never going to give me better service. Maybe that's why nobody's offered me an AV as a service contract yet. I don't know.
Yep. Well, and that goes to the next point, right? Where's the breaking point? You know, where does it impact the 5-minute SLA? And this is where I guess I should drop the big bomb now and talk about the AV as a service, the active AV as a service contract at USC. I know. Can you believe it? I'm at an institution that has an active AV as a service contract, and it makes a good story because I walk into a conference room and that I am booked in for a meeting, and there's a little sign, and it says, if you're having issues, don't call central IT, call X number, and it's the integrator's number. After looking more into this, because again, we're a federated model, based on who pays for it, their service goes, all that might be very common at larger institutions. The more I go into it, that company actually won't come out unless they have 6 hours worth of work to do. Okay, like literally the screen in that room has the HDMI cable hanging down from the bottom of it. And the IT company for that department has told them, and it's on the list of things to fix, when they get 6 hours worth of stuff to come out for. How's that for that 5-minute SLA for a, you know, executive boardroom that just, I'm sure it looks great when you bring a donor in there, you know, and not only that, with the contract, if I go try to fix it because it's bothering the heck out of me staring at it for an hour, I've now broken the service agreement. So this is like, and you know, I sit there and go, who signed this thing? And maybe that's the point. It was done when the building, and they redid the entire thing. The integrator came in, sold the whole thing as a package, and it's more than just this, you know, the extended service contract. It was literally we're going to service 100%. You get timed out that's already built in that we can purchase or upgrade the equipment after so many years. I mean, it literally is an AV as a service contract. And the thing is, I'm willing to bet they did a killer sales job because there was no real AV team in place, right, at that point. And this is, you know, thankfully, kind of the reason I was brought in here. We can start, you know, shaking this out. But somebody signed that contract, and that is crazy, right? And it was 100% based on how can we get money and never actually have to show back up there.
And Steve asks, if you break the service contract, if you go in and fix it, what happens after that?
Well, I bet they basically keep collecting the money. That's what I wonder. How many months have they been collecting money and never had to come back out? You know, and that's what's crazy. And who knows? Maybe they're thinking, I don't know. You know, if you get enough buildings, there's probably 6 hours worth of stuff to do every day. I don't know. But I sit there and go, now, thankfully, that was a conference room. Whoever, the department that signed it understands that. The signs are there. They probably just don't call because they know that no one's going to come take care of them anyway. So maybe the integrator did exactly what they were intending to have happen with that. But what if that were a classroom? And the fact is, the classrooms have this same kind of agreement. Now, it is 24 hours on a classroom, but they'll come out and change, broken equipment that they're monitoring remotely. But that still means an entire day's worth of classes down, and no one to actually have them call and say, hey, we're going to find an alternative for you in the meantime. That's crazy.
Yeah. But you wonder, I mean, the one thing that's sad that story is sad to me, it doesn't have to do with AV as a service, is part of the sales job to that group probably worked because they'd had some poor experience in the past, right? They convinced that group that they were going to provide them better service than they had gotten previously.
Yeah, Andrew makes a good point. Yes, it is 24 hours to the location. I would hope they would have a hot swap ready, but only because they do have a remote monitoring contract along with it, as part of the whole contract. But who knows? I'm not involved with it, but I walked into it and saw it and shook my head.
I will say one of the things when I was working at a systems integrator, one of the things that we talked about when we were talking about creating these types of models is that we would have a certain amount of hot swap parts that they would purchase up front as a part of the original contract, so that we had the correct parts sitting ready to go to do a swap out. So those are some things that integrators will think of and try and think through to make sure that they have the right parts.
Was that written out in the contract that you gave, or was that something you did on the back end?
No, that would be all up front, right? And so we would, itemize, here's the spare parts cache that you're purchasing as a part of the entire contract. So
interesting.
And I guess really quickly to go through, based on our conversations, 2 positives, right, that we thought could actually be good with an AV as a service contract. And that would be refresh cycle. And I think you mentioned this earlier, Scott. Can you upgrade earlier than, say, 5 to 7 years or however long? I'm sure most of our schools keep it up there till we really, really, really can't deal with it, and then try to get one more year out of it, right? So maybe you can negotiate that. And then also the point of a larger integrator will have more access to labor, right? If we're doing it in-house, we might have 2 or 3 people we pay all the time. Well, now they're taking on a huge lump of work during, Christmas break and during summer, where maybe a large integrator can plan and have less people read during the school year, but more people during those high traffic times, and they can move and shift their staff around to make the deliverables easier.
Can I jump in just for 1 second? I just want to give what was the big driving factor for us doing almost everything in-house was getting a classroom bid. It was a fairly good sized classroom. The cost was going to be $92,000 for us to redo this classroom, which is a lot, but it was a big room. That was when we started looking at doing things. We were just getting started with our Extron training and Crestron trainings, and we started doing things ourselves. We made the crazy decision to go ahead and try to do one ourselves. So we did it, and we did it for $27,000. The same, we used their bill of materials. We bought stuff from box sales. We did the programming ourselves. We installed it ourselves. We did the work and got it up and running. Now, for that same $92,000 budget, we were able to not just do that room, but then do 2 more rooms on top of that, and then have some hot swappables and do our tech refresh. So
we
that to
we
me-
find the exact same thing here. We get it.
Yeah.
You know, we can quote it out from our integrator partner, but our in-house cost is somewhere between a third and a half in many cases of the cost of what the integrator would charge us. So
Yep.
And I would add on top of that, if we're talking about value, for me, when we made these arguments about doing it internally and not doing any event staging, is the staff members who work at Bates now know those rooms like the back of their hands because they installed them. They walk into that room and they can fix it in a second. They can go back and do the programming. That to me is the biggest long-term value of it, is they can
Absolutely.
do anything in a split second.
And to
Yeah.
Steve and Clay's point, they're asking, does that include any labor or does that include our salaries? No, because we're considered bought and paid for already. Our salaries come from the university. They come from, our budget is done separately from what our capital budget would be. So we're paid for. So whether we sit here all day or we go out and do work, we're paid for. So I don't usually include that in our budget proposals.
well, so we're different that way because we are kind of a fee for service on campus. I mean, we are literally an in-house campus integrator,
Sure.
an AV integrator. And so, when I'm preparing quotes for departments to come do AV work for them, it does include our labor. Now, it includes our labor at the pre-established labor rate. Somebody on campus has a spreadsheet that they tell me your in-house rate is X based upon your labor and overhead of your team. But yeah, I mean, so even including
Now,
the labor, we're around half the cost.
Do campus entities have to use you, or can they go outside?
They can go outside. No, absolutely, they can go outside. And there, I tell people there's pros and cons, right? Some of the pros of using us is, the big pro is it's going to be half price. The con is we're probably going to be slower. In many cases, a lot slower than what an integrator could come in and do it. The other thing is, if you use an integrator, you get full insurance. In our case, in our current contract, we get a full 1-year warranty on the installation. You're not going to get any of that if you use us, right? If you use us, it's funny, if we break something during the install, you're paying for it because even if it's our fault and we break it,
we're an integrator. You really were an integrator.
because we don't. It's not like we're funded, and we don't put any profit on anything. When we buy the parts, we resell the parts at our cost. We're not putting any markup on anything. There's no markup on our labor, so there's no profit to come with for fixing things that get broken, and we don't have any insurance. So it's kind of on the department if we break it. So there's certainly some downsides to departments. So it's like, yeah, you could save a bunch of money, but here's the risk aspects of that. How risk averse are you, right? So that's some of the decision factors that our campus has to think about if they choose to use us versus an outside integrator.
Yeah. Well,
I think to answer Clay's point, it's not apples to apples. You're right. It's not apples to apples. But I'm looking at my capital budget and I have X amount to spend, and I'm either going to give that money away to someone else, or we're going to keep it in and do more with that money than was there. I get a value added to that. So even though I might be bought and paid for, or we look at it that way, if I'm spending $92,000 with an integrator and paying their labor costs and everything else that goes on with that, then I can do more with that same money doing it ourselves, I think is the bottom line.
It's so 100%. And also, I mean, I'm going to tag in because Chris Netto made a comment and he asked a question. Do your teams deal with labor unions on your campuses? And he sees cable. Now, this is what's very interesting. So this black thing behind me, the reason it's there is because we have a union that has to do painting, and I'm in my new office and I've been here 4 months and I can't get my wall painted and it still has holes in it from the previous tenant of my office. Okay. And I just didn't want that on the video. So that's where we have that, but we don't have it for as far as AV. We don't have to do it, but as far as maybe our cable pulls, but our network group will do that. But at my previous institution, and I say this all the time, I mean, student workers. I mean, I found this when I very first kind of came into higher ed, and I saw that an integrator charged $4,500 to, put up a new 75-inch display. And I had to help take down the old one because they only sent 2 people out who couldn't lift it. And I was like, wait. And then I'm like, okay, what was the labor rate? Are you telling me that I can't have, I could pay 10 student workers in the same amount of time? You're telling me that 10 student workers couldn't take the 4 screws off the back of the TV, change the bracket, and put it up, right? In that amount of money. Yes, it included the television, but again, how much of that was labor and the $800 take away your other display fee, $800 take away your other display fee. And so, and now when you talk about investing, we had the conversation yesterday, right? During how many of the sessions were about investing in the next generation. Why are we actually doing this in the higher ed vertical where we could do this in any other vertical? And what makes us special is the students. And I sit there and think, like, I love investing in the student workers. I mean, my team were rock stars, right? To where they could get into a room, rip out the old stuff, pull cable, if needed, load in the equipment, configure it, get out of the room, and we all go have lunch together. Good luck finding an integrator who say, yeah, I only need 4 hours in the room to actually swap out everything. It would never happen. And yet, once you start training your student workers and you can put them into the, configuration classes or train them, I mean, why wouldn't I want to invest in that and invest in them?
Yeah, so that's certainly a different model we have in higher ed, right? Is using those students as workers, but also to train and teach them. Because if you talk about value and service, there is a risk of staff, and I think any of us would feel that way. You have one of the nice things about AV as a service is they take that risk, right? That you don't worry about losing staff, you don't worry about staff vacations, you don't worry about staff sick days. They are required to always staff you. It's interesting. One of the things a couple of comments here. One from Chase about staff expertise, and that they deal with a lot of people who don't have expertise to even change lamps. And I think maybe, Chase, that is a case where AV as a service would work, right? I don't think probably a typical higher ed institution like we're talking about, that they don't have that, but it may be a place where it works. My other comment would be, I think that Chase puts a list here of things that AV as a service options could include. I think most of us already do all of that already, and that's one of our struggles, right? Again, what am I getting from your service that I'm not already getting?
And can you get it to me at a better price?
And if we're not doing it, we're certainly thinking about doing it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I guess so. What do we say? I mean, I guess we know that AV as a service is not going anywhere, regardless of what my T-shirt says. All right. We already know it is staying. It is the direction. The industry is pot committed at this point, right? Yeah. But here's also the call, right? I know that no matter how much I get bashed on Twitter, and whenever something comes up about AV as a service, I know I'm going to get tagged on it. But I always come back with this. Has anyone actually sold a contract? I mean, no one can actually say they've actually sold an AV as a service contract. I mean, we had one, and we had the integrator at CCUMC embarrass the heck out of themselves because they came with a case study but wouldn't tell us how much it cost. It's like, that was a great presentation, but I can't pull a PO if you don't give me a number. And so I wonder if that's where, because maybe we actually are in-house integrators, and maybe we really do understand the business side of it, and therefore, if you bring us the dollars, we're going to look at it and go, thanks, no thanks. And maybe that's why it can't come. It's not coming.
We do have one, it looks like.
Uh-oh. Here we
Tracy
go.
Bryant just said, yes, we have sold one to a large international university who have campuses in 3 countries.
I would love to know who.
All right.
And I would love to see the contract.
Tracy, would you be, so I'm gonna go off script here.
Do
Would
it.
you be willing to come on the show here? Be our call in.
Phone lines are open.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tracy.
Would you be willing to come share a little bit about that with us?
I can promote you in. All
Oh,
right,
there you
Tracy.
go.
Here we go. She's coming in. Let me see. Wait, how come she's not under? Oh, there we go. She raised her hand. Allow to talk. And here we go. We might have a new panelist coming in.
Hello.
Hello. How we doing?
Doing well in Dallas, Texas today.
Hey, very nice. You know, my daughter was born in Dallas, so I always have well, she'll claim herself as a Texan, even though I left when she was 9 months. So, all right. So we have to hear about this.
So first of all, tell us who you're with.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'm with AVI-SPL, and we sold a large as-a-service contract that includes what Chase wrote above, pretty much all of the above, the on-prem staff, our Symphony platform for monitoring, all of the equipment, big contract to Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in Australia.
Hey, all right.
Actually,
we got a name and everything. I love it.
Yeah, it's a big case study that's all over our website, and they were actually in our booth at InfoComm last year as a subject matter expert. So there's a lot out there about this story. But they had challenges monitoring and managing, obviously, campuses across 3 different countries. They do have their own staff, and they do provide their own tier 1 support. So we back them up with tier 2 support, as well as links to manufacturers and swappable parts and the Symphony platform and our help desk. But, you know, it's global, right? So very large in nature and very challenging. And they had significant issues with downtime and with outages and with classrooms going down, and just couldn't handle the workload. So we are now responsible for the overflow, as well as, and they also had some extensive upgrades that were required at the time. So they needed to get everything under one coterminous contract as well, and upgrade a good deal of rooms across 3 countries and multiple campuses. So they were very challenged, and it made sense for them. It's a 3-year agreement, by the way.
So that sounds like that they had specific pain points that they couldn't address based on
Correct.
their current status.
Correct.
So would you mind telling us at the end of the 3 years, what happens at the end of the 3 years? Do they own the gear, or do they have to re-up with you, or do you know?
They have the option to either buy the gear for, you know, the dollar buyout, or to completely refresh and recycle.
Great. And do you know, I mean, obviously it works out financially, but was this something where they had to, were they apples for apples on it? Did they understand that they had to get special finance? I don't even know how things work in Australia as far as how they do schools.
I'm not familiar with that either,
so
by the way.
So what did that look like?
Obviously, and it was actually brought to us by one of our in-country subcontracting and teaming partners, and then we took it over. And so they're also providing a lot of the on-prem support. That company, which is a teaming partner of ours. So I don't know the specifics on the apples to apples, however. Sorry, I can't answer that.
So there's not an AVI-SPL presence in Australia as much as there is. You have a subcontractor that works for you there.
That's correct. More of a teaming partner, right? That we have an agreement with, that we didn't merge or acquire the organization, but we have contracts with them.
So Tracy, would you be willing to give a name up? Not right now, but would you be willing to give Joe Way a name from somebody over there? Because I bet Joe would like to have somebody from over there on his podcast to talk about this.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. I'm sure that, you know, we'd have to get their okay. But like I said, if you go to and read the case studies that are out there about them, they're pretty vocal about it.
Great. No, that is awesome. I think that's fantastic that there is one. And I think that the key is, and thank you, Tracy, for coming on. I'm going to put you back down. But actually, I do have one question. So, okay, you're listening to all of our conversations. So where are we going wrong? What is the one thing we need to know to change our thought? Or was it just that it happened to be that institution, it was the perfect moment for their needs? Like, why are the rest of us confused?
I don't think you guys are confused. I agree with the number of your points. I simply think that, different cases, it's going to make sense for different institutions. I don't think it really boils down to size or complexity. I think whether or not you have already the in-house support and how you manage that, and whether or not you have additional needs. I mean, I think you have done a great job of pointing out some particular challenges where it may make sense. I think that you absolutely have to get enough stakeholders in those conversations to better understand whether they've got local assistance, whether they've got in-house assistance, whether they have a lot of overflow, what is the knowledge base, are they in geographically challenged areas, do they have financial challenges? There's a lot of parts and pieces that go into that. I can tell you, we are in numerous conversations about this. Those discovery sessions are happening and there's a lot of interest around it, but I think there's so many questions going on that you have to have a wide and varied group of stakeholders involved.
Well, that is fantastic. And I totally agree with that. So that is fantastic. Sorry, I'm going to promote you back down. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Tracy.
I'm getting demoted.
feel free to call back anytime.
Okay.
All right.
Well, so I think certainly what Tracy just showed was what can happen when you actually listen to needs and try to respond to a customer's actual needs, as opposed to just trying to sell them a product that will suit you. It was very clear that she had done that and had really thought about the needs of the customer.
Absolutely. And I think we were all sitting here going, wow, there was actually a use case, and there was a valid use case. I actually believe it was the perfect storm for someone who obviously, and we don't know it, but we can probably assume staffing levels, the needs, the labor to do these things, the expertise, the need to, it said 3 locations. So maybe there's it seemed to be the perfect storm where you went, yep. It almost was my example, right? Where I said, a commercial, someone who has a location in Miami, Boston, and LA, and you've got a few things need. But that was scaled up, right? So I guess the answer is it can work in higher ed. That wasn't our point. We weren't supposed to get there. We're supposed to say no.
I'm still not, and full disclosure, we do our box sales through AVISPL. So, I still don't, I see some points there where absolutely, I think that for those pain points that they were having, this works, except that they're now subcontracting to another company. And then they're reliant upon that company to hold up that SLA for them, in the long run. What if that company fails? What if they decide, well, we can't go there today? Where does that, how do those dominoes fall? I just think it's hard on the integrator side, and maybe Mike could speak to it better. I just think it's hard to uphold those kind of contracts in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I'm going to choose to avoid to speak to that. I will say a good, honest integrator probably could uphold, could fulfill. I'm not gonna claim that there's no, integrators out there that aren't really trying to do the best for their clients, because absolutely I believe that there are many that have their clients' interest in mind, and
I agree.
but they also, it's just a fact of business. They also have to have profit in mind. That just has to be a part of what they're doing. I mean, that's why they exist. They're in existence to make a profit. So,
well, and I know we have to kind of start wrapping up here because we've got the esports session coming up very, very shortly. But I think you make a good point. And also just with that, vendor relationships are coming up in the next couple hours too, right after the esports, because it is about having those partnerships, right? I mean, I said earlier, who could actually leverage an AV as a service contract? Only a couple linear that are close to $1 billion AV companies. And it happened to be, isn't that the one that just jumped on, right? Happened to be the near $1 billion AV company. So, there obviously is a case, and I think it has to be able to understand the needs. And that's kind of where we started, right? And I think it's exactly what you talked about, Scott, when we first started too, is just listening, understanding the service level, and finding out how can you align all those together.
Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts, anyone, before we cut out and put everyone on break before esports?
One thing I always wonder about, and I think you kind of got to this a little bit, Joe, is how many years, is it 5, is it 10 before we re-watch this and go, oh, silly us.
No. Must die.
I think it's a retirement. The other one is, I think we needed some shirts like that say in-house integrators.
Oh,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Yep. All right. We'll get on that. Are the avswag.com people on? No.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who's been on the chat. We didn't get to everybody, but there were some great comments. And some great conversation going on in there.
The chat was amazing, and I agree with that comment. Yeah, we
could have a whole other thing just on the chat that was going on the side.
Way too many comments to get to on the.
I know. By the time we could talk about one, it was how far up the chat. It was crazy. Oh, this is fantastic. And we have hands raised. I'm sorry we can't get to the hand, Matthew, but oh my gosh, this was great conversation, and it will continue. This thing's going nowhere. So,
and by the way, if you still have questions, keep them for tomorrow. You can certainly come back with the questions in our AV coffee hour, and we'll do our best to answer them then. So
that's right. So second session tomorrow is AV coffee hour. Cool. All right. Cutting us off. Here we go. I got to post.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll be back in 10 minutes.